Chapter 100. Interpreting Symbols. Clues to the Clown Potion. On the seat of honor at the ancient bronze table, Klein repeated the divination statement a few times before leaning back and entering a deep sleep. His surroundings quickly became peaceful and quiet. He saw a hazy view, with countless distorted and blurry scenes flashing past, just like drops of morning dew on tender flower petals. Gradually, Klein grasped his spirituality and came to his senses. He saw a fireplace before him with a rocking chair in front of it. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Although he couldn't see her face since she was hanging her head low, Klein's gut feeling told him that she was an old lady, and he was pretty certain about it. The old lady was facing a desk directly. There were newspapers and tin cans inlaid with silver on the desk. This is... Klein found the scene before his eyes very familiar, and he quickly recognized what he saw. This was where Ray Bieber and his mother stayed. This was where he saw a bloated cadaver for the first time. There are clues that point to the clown potion here. Just as Klein's thoughts flashed past, the scene around him transformed. It was a grayish-white warehouse, hidden among identical buildings. There were white bones scattered all around, and a few balls of flesh that looked like they had been squashed by a boulder. In the middle of the warehouse was a grayish-white object that was the size of a fist. Its surface was filled with ditches, and it looked soft but ductile. It looked like a brain that had been extracted out of a living being. Just as Klein recognized the scene and recalled something, the scene before him distorted like rippling water before transforming into another new, blurry scene. A naked body was laid on a long table covered with a white cloth. There were some bluish, discolored patches on the corpse's skin. Klein suddenly knitted his eyebrows and muttered, "It was first the images of Ray Bieber's hiding place and his remains, and now it's related to the brand on the suited clown's wrist." Just as he attempted to speculate what the scenes meant, the scene suddenly changed again. A marble coffee table, a set of 2 leather couches, and a chandelier that hung high on the ceiling. There were 3 people: Klein Moretti, who had black hair, brown eyes, and a scholarly temperament, a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin, and a beautiful young lady with fishnet gloves. Following that, it was another 3 people and an object, a middle-aged man in a black robe who had thick, spiky brown hair, a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin, a half-century-old elder with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair, and gray-blue eyes, and a black notebook on the round table in between all of them, a notebook that exuded an ancient and distant air. The Antigonous family's notebook. Klein suddenly sat up straight, and the dream vanished. Looking outside the divine hall, where there was boundless gray fog and crimson stars, he thought in both shock and confusion. I was divining for clues to the clown potion? Why would the Antigonous family's notebook show up? Let me think. That chubby guy was Welch. Yes, Welch, an unfortunate fella who bought the Antigonous family's notebook and triggered a sequence of incidents. The beautiful young lady wearing fishnet gloves was Naya. I remember the marble coffee table and leather couch combination is a hallmark of Welch's place. I saw spirit medium daily there. In other words, what I saw was Welch's living room. It was a scene where the original Klein and his 2 classmates were discussing the notebook. Klein calmed himself down and tapped on the edge of the long bronze table rhythmically. Then, what does the last scene represent? The notebook appeared. Welch appeared. Could it be the scene where he bought the ancient item? There were another 2 people, and one of them looked very familiar. I feel like I've seen the middle-aged man in the classic black robe somewhere before. That spiky brown hair, severe dark eye circles. Yes, I know who is he now. Hermes Vincent from the Divination Club, the Hermes Vincent who died peacefully after Captain snuck into his dream, having learned that Selena secretly obtained the secret incantation from him. No way, he was the one that sold the notebook to Welch. Everything appears to be coming full circle. The world sure is small. No, Tingen is really small. On careful thought, it really is a possibility that Hermes Vincent wasn't an ordinary fortune teller. He was obviously deep into mysticism and obtained the attention of an ancient evil god. He had the channels, ability, and opportunity to acquire the notebook that was accidentally released by the secret order. It's no wonder Captain and company never figured out where Welch bought the notebook. Their investigative approach was entirely wrong. They had attempted to investigate via the antique market. But when the actual whereabouts of the notebook was found, they gave up on that lead. What a pity. Hermes Vincent just passed away not too long ago. Otherwise, we definitely could have found out something regarding the notebook. Since he was involved in mysticism, he should have researched the notebook. His death was way too coincidental. However, there was another person at the scene, a man in his 50s. He might know quite a bit of what happened. Klein stopped tapping his fingers on the edge of the table and looked through every scene of his dream divination once more. Ray Bieber's house, Ray Bieber's hideout spot, the remains of Ray Bieber, the brand on the suited clown's wrist, Welch's house, Welch, Naya, and original Klein'S exchange, Welch, Hannes Vincent, and the Antigonous family notebooks group photo. Hey, besides the brand on the suited clown, everything else is directly related to the Antigonous family's notebook. But I had divined for clues to the clown potion. This isn't scientific, nor does it make mystical sense. After becoming a seer, Klein once tried to divine where Welch had bought the Antigonous family's notebook, but he never considered using the unique qualities that the area above the grey fog possessed. As such, he had failed to receive any revelations, but now he had chanced upon the truth by divining something separate. After spending nearly 20 seconds to calm down, Klein summarized the context provided by Roselle's diary and attempted to interpret his dream divination. The first possibility, Zaratul, or should I say, the secret order, was searching and pursuing the relics of the Antigonous family. So, the symbolic meaning of the dream is to use matters related to the Antigonous family to lure the secret order into appearing, so as to obtain the clown potion's formula. The second possibility, the clown potion's formula is directly recorded in the Antigonous family's notebook. The fact that the Zaratul family is seeking the relics of the Antigonous family implies that they share very deep connections. They could have been allies or enemies, hence it seems fairly natural that the Antigonous family possessed parts of their sequence. Things would be obvious if they were allies, but enemies are the ones who would know each other the best. But the second explanation wouldn't be able to link it to the brand on the suited clown. Sigh. I do wish that the second explanation were true, though. When the Holy Cathedral finds an expert to interpret the notebook, I would be able to obtain the clown potion without any risk. It seems that the first explanation is the most plausible. My gut feeling as a seer tells me that there might be a deeper symbolic meaning. Having thought of this, Klein massaged his forehead and suddenly realized the limitations of a seer. Unless it was a very simple and straightforward sign, a seer had to be extremely careful when making interpretations. It was just like walking on the edge of the abyss or walking on a thin layer of ice over a lake's surface. The suited clown's outcome was an actual and bloody example of what a single mistake in interpretation or failure to grasp a key point could result in. In that instant, Klein had an illusion of himself mastering the true essence of a seer. He seemed to be just one step away from digesting the potion completely. "Thank you for enlightening me with your life. Praise the lady," he muttered, and drew a crimson moon before his chest. Then he divined whether Azik had good intentions or if he was an amazing beyonder. He received confirmations for both of them. Eventually, the continuous divinations exhausted Klein. He had no choice but to stop churning through his thoughts and decide on the crucial matters that he needed to attend to. I have to find the man that appeared in the same scene with Welch, Hermes Vincent, and the Antigonous family's notebook as soon as possible. I can begin my search with the Divination Club. I can't just confront Mr. Azik. Yes, he might be a mid-sequence beyonder of the life school of thought, but there's a lack of information, making it impossible for me to divine. Phew. Klein let out a breath and conjured the portrait of the half-century-old elder with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair, and grey-blue eyes on the goatskin that appeared before him. This was the third person present when the Antigonous family's notebook was traded between Welch and Hermes Vincent. Looking at the portrait, Klein suddenly fell into a dilemma. I can't draw. During art class in primary school, I was always the one receiving the greatest criticism from the teachers. Should I use ritualistic magic like old Neil? This was done by praying to the goddess. If I were to use the uniqueness of the area above the grey fog, I would be in trouble if the divinities noticed something amiss. Hold on a second, perhaps I can pray to myself. Transmitting images and transmitting voices are similar. Although I'm temporarily unable to access the mysterious power above the grey fog, accomplishing such a minor matter shouldn't be a problem. Having thought of this, Klein immediately emanated his spirituality to envelop himself to stimulate the feeling of falling. Back in his bedroom, he lit the gas lamp and prayed. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. You are the mysterious ruler above the grey fog. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray for your revelation and pray that you allow me to draw what I've seen. After reciting the incantation, Klein didn't splash essential oils or burn any herbs to gain the help of their powers. It was just that informal when praying to oneself. There were suddenly murmurs in his ears as he saw the 4 black dots that formed a square surface on the back of his hand. He walked 4 steps counterclockwise and recited the incantation before penetrating the maniacal chaos to return to the area above the grey fog. This time, he didn't see any of the crimson stars shrinking or expanding, but behind the seat of honor at the long bronze table, the strange symbol formed by a partial pupilless eye and partial contorted lines shimmered weakly as it produced illusory prayers. Klein held his ear to it and listened. After making sure that there were no mistakes, he conjured the portrait of the third person and cast it towards the flowing light in accordance to the prayer's format. After everything was done, he immediately left the mysterious world above the grey fog and returned to his bedroom. Just as he found his footing, a portrait surfaced immediately in front of Klein's eyes. Furthermore, he sensed a weak and illusory power augmenting him. He picked up a fountain pen and found a piece of white paper and expressed his intent. Klein was surprised to find his right hand moving uncontrollably as it quickly drew lines. Before long, he saw a lifelike portrait of the third person. After writing down the hair and eye colors, as well as other unique characteristics, Klein heaved a sigh of relief despite the spasms of his right hand. The illusion before his eyes rapidly dissipated. Chapter 101, Unexpected Clue House Street Divination Club. Klein pressed down on his half-top hat and walked along the stairway towards the main door. He wasn't dressed in his usual formal wear. Today, he was wearing a white shirt and a light-colored vest, paired with a thin black windbreaker, making him look more spirited than he had before. This set of clothing was more suitable for combat and had only cost him £1, including the fee for the small pocket that he had sewn into the vest. Compared to the suit he had purchased, it was so cheap that it brought tears to his eyes. He stroked the revolver in his holster, as well as the metal bottles in his tiny inner pocket. Klein then took out the portrait and entered the Divination Club. Without any surprise, he met the beautiful attendant, Angelica. "Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti. I thought you would come only a few days later." Angelica was taken aback at first, before she immediately revealed a brilliant smile. Klein took off his hat and sighed. "Good afternoon, Miss Angelica. I had a dream at noon. I dreamed about Mr. Hermes Vincent and matters regarding him. You know that, as a fortune-teller, I absolutely cannot overlook any dream. It could be a revelation from the divine." Confused by his charlatan-like words, Angelica nodded in thought and asked out of curiosity, "What did you dream of?" "I saw Hermes Vincent arguing with someone." Klein passed her the folded piece of paper in his hand. As Angelica unfolded the portrait, he pinched his glabella and observed the color of her emotions. This person, Angelica looked at the realistic portrait and slipped into deep thought. Klein saw her emotions turn into a thinking blue, a normal reaction. "This person," Angelica muttered once again. She slowly looked up and said, "I've met him before." Klein's mind whirled as he immediately asked, "When was it?" "I can't remember the exact date. Maybe a month ago. I saw him send Mr. Vincent to the door, and they were softly discussing something. I have a deep impression of him because of his thick and messy eyebrows, as well as Mr. Vincent's rare smile," Angelica described as she recalled. "Yes, he had a pair of grayish-blue eyes and, like most men his age, had little hair on his head." "Did you meet him again before or after that?" asked Klein, gently. Angelica shook her head. "No, I am certain of that. I don't even know his name. To be honest, if it wasn't you, I would have suspected that any person showing me a portrait like this is a policeman investigating Mr. Vincent's death. Huh. I don't find it odd no matter what revelation you receive, for you are a true seer. My apologies. I am a policeman," Klein retorted silently as he sighed and said, "A true seer would understand how minuscule he truly is compared to the vastness of fate. We can only see a hazy corner, forever receiving revelations but never answers. We must reflect upon them constantly and keep up our respect and fear. We must decipher these hints with caution and not see ourselves as the intelligent ones who have taken control of fate." By summarizing what he had figured out over the past few weeks, Klein suddenly realized that his spirit vision turned clearer. He could even faintly make out the details within Angelica's aura. At that instant, he felt like a short-sighted man who was wearing glasses that suited him. Has my seer potion begun to produce clear signs of digestion?" Klein was stunned in disbelief. "I never imagined that a seer like you can still maintain such fear and respect towards fate. It's truly admirable," said Angelica earnestly. She had seen too many people in the Divination Club who claimed to see through the truth and change fate after learning a few divination methods. Klein retracted his gaze and chuckled. "The more you know, the better you can understand how small we truly are." As he was saying this, he checked his body's condition and reflected on his past experiences. He could basically narrow the essence of the acting technique to actions corresponding to the name of the potion, understanding the hidden laws governing the role, as well as strictly abiding by these laws. Only by doing so could he change the state of his body, heart, and soul, making them closer to the remnant psyche in the potion, so as to gradually digest it. The acknowledgement of a seer's identity was only a factor on the surface. The reason why it made one's spirituality feel light had to do with how the feedback strengthened one's affirmation of particular divination actions. And these actions collectively formed the rules for digesting the seer potion, to help others interpret revelations and guide them in a better direction, yet constantly maintain one's fear and respect towards fate. One cannot be too egoistical, too proud, or blindly believe one's interpretations. These are the laws I can think of for the time being, as well as the essence of the acting technique that will guide me towards the future. If it continues to be this successful, I won't need half a year. Perhaps in 2 or 3 months, or even 2 to 3 weeks' time, I'll be ready to completely digest the potion. That sign was extremely obvious. It's no wonder the mysterious Mr. Zaratul said that the Beyonder will clearly sense it when the potion is fully digested. There's no need for anyone to teach them. It is what it is. Just like now, although my spirit vision has been enhanced a little, I know very well that this is only a pit stop in the digestion process and not the final destination. With this in mind, Klein couldn't help but thank the suited clown for teaching him with his life. If it wasn't for him, he would probably spend months at the Divination Club summarizing the rules of a seer through numerous attempts, for better or for worse, before he began acting strictly. "Mr. Moretti, I sometimes even think of you as a philosopher," Angelica said, with a sigh upon hearing Klein's reply. "In my circle of friends, the term philosophers is used to scold somebody." Klein was in a good mood. With that said, he bowed, wore his hat, and left after bidding farewell. Although Angelica was unaware of the gentleman's name or identity, Klein was in no way depressed. What he learned was sufficient enough for him to engage in the next phase of his plan. 36 Zutaland Street, inside Blackthorn Security Company. Dunn looked at the portrait in his hands with his deep grey eyes. You wish to carry out a search for this person? Yes. Klein had long prepared a reason for this. Captain, didn't I mention that I would head to the Divination Club to observe the reactions of its members on Hermes Vincent's sudden death? I didn't discover anything yesterday, but I accidentally found out today that the person in the portrait had appeared with Hermes Vincent once and was secretly discussing something with him. I flipped through our team's investigation report just now, but I didn't discover any person resembling him in the report. There were no loopholes in his description. Even if Dunn Smith were to take this portrait to the Divination Club, he would get the same answer from Angelica. Dunn cast his gaze away from the portrait and laughed. From the looks of it, the compensation funds weren't a waste. Captain, isn't your memory bad? Why would you mention the compensation at this point in time? Klein maintained a smile and didn't say a word. Was this drawn by you? Dunn asked in passing. Yes, I drew it with the help of ritualistic magic, Klein replied, completely honest. Of course, speaking the truth and revealing the whole truth were two different matters. Dunn nodded slightly and said, Get old Neil to make a few more sets. I'll get Kenley and Royale to investigate and seek the cooperation of the police department. If this clue is of any use, you would have contributed greatly once again. May Goddess bless us. Klein tapped 4 spots on his chest as he appeared abnormally devout. For him, all he needed from Dunn and company was to figure out the name and identity of the man in the portrait. He could divine his location above the grey fog. Despite it being his day off, Klein didn't immediately return home after leaving the Blackthorn Security Company. Instead, he took the public carriage to the harbour and arrived in front of the Evil Dragon Bar's entrance. In his considerations, although a seer lacked the means to directly engage in combat with an enemy or the means to cast spells quickly, combat could be classified in many ways. Not all battles were chance encounters. As long as he had sufficient time to prepare, a seer could similarly deal with an enemy using ritualistic magic. It was exactly how he resolved the magic mirror divination incident at Selena's house. And this also meant that it was best if a seer brought along the essential oils, herbs, and tiny candles to avoid being in a situation where they were unavailable when they were needed most, thus resulting in a helpless death. After all, not everyone was like Selena, who had an entire assortment of mysticism items which could be used. As for the ones he applied for, as Klein had practiced frequently, he had used up most of them. He kept what was left in his tiny inner pocket. He patted the cash note in his pocket and pushed open Evil Dragon Bar's door and strode in. It was noon, and there weren't many customers in the bar, nor were there any rat-baiting or boxing matches. It was quiet and not lively enough. Klein observed the guests drinking beer and playing cards as he walked toward the billiard room that led to the underground market. At that moment, he saw a muscular old man walk out with a torn admiral's jacket draped over his shoulders. Were you the friend old Neil brought last time? Reeking with the smell of alcohol, the blue-eyed, messy, brown-haired elder sized up Klein and laughed. Klein guessed at his identity and took off his hat and bowed. Yes, how might I address you? Old Neil often mentions you. I'm the boss here, Swain. The blue-eyed elder's arms were thick and brawny. He had firm muscles and had the bearing of a military officer. Former Tingan-mandated Punisher captain. Rumor has it that he was once part of the Royal Navy. Klein replied politely, Yes. If you're in need of money, feel free to approach me. Swain laughed as he mentioned before walking towards the bar counter. At that moment, Klein's heart stirred as he immediately shouted, Wait a moment, Mr. Swain. I have something I would like to ask of you. Swain halted in his steps, turned halfway around, and said with a chuckle, You look, well, very similar. No, I'm not having memory issues. The corner of Klein's lips twitched as he pointed at the portrait he drew and asked, Have you met this gentleman before? He suddenly realized that Selena had likely been brought by Hermes Vincent to the underground market. This resulted in Elizabeth's knowledge of the Evil Dragon Bar as well. Then, could the man in the portrait, who had some relationship with Hermes Vincent, have come here before? Swain took a careful look and replied affirmatively, I remember him. He had asked me if I had documents or items related to the main peak of the Hornasis mountain range. Documents and items related to the main peak of the Hornasis mountain range? Klein was taken aback as he suddenly connected that to another matter. Back when he was borrowing the journal issue related to the main peak of the Hornasis mountain range at Deweyville Library, the librarian had casually mentioned that someone had just returned it. Therefore, he still remembered very cleverly and didn't need to flip through his name cards to determine if the man existed. Could the gentleman who borrowed the journal issue before me be the one in the portrait? The gentleman that had witnessed the exchange of the Antigonous family's notebook. Chapter 1. 102. Cloth Merchant. The more Klein thought about it, the more likely it seemed. Otherwise, who would have borrowed those random journal issues for no reason? Yes, research regarding the main peak of the Hornasis mountain range is quite an unpopular field. Other than the corresponding lecturers and associate professors, the common hobbyist would have never heard of it. Even the original Klein, who was a history graduate, only knew about it from the Antigonous family's notebook. Although Tingen is a city of universities, there wouldn't be that many people who would be interested in the topic. And even if there is anyone interested, most of them would remain within the university's compounds. There would be no need to borrow the book from the Deweyville Library. The most important point is that the book happened to be borrowed only recently. By analyzing it this way, there really is a problem. I wasn't sharp enough and failed to realize it. Sigh. It looks like I have no talent at being a detective or acting like Sherlock Holmes. While these thoughts raced through his mind, the boss of Evil Dragon Bar, Swain, asked in puzzlement, "Is there a problem?" Since there were customers and bartenders around, he could only ask indirectly. "Nothing at all. I'm just wondering how I can investigate this gentleman. As you know, Hermes Vincent died at his home." Klein had long prepared his excuse. He didn't want to make the mandated punishers become interested in the ancient relics from the main peak of the Hornasis mountain range. Vincent was one of the rather famous fortune-tellers in Tingen City. He often came here. Swain had indeed given a perfunctory answer, but as he recalled, he said, "Now that I think about it, the gentleman in the portrait did come together with Vincent at the very beginning." "That is exactly what I wanted to know. Do you remember his name?" Klein pressed immediately. Swain shook his head and chuckled. "I won't ask for my customers' names or identities unless I knew them to begin with, like old Neil." "All right, then." Klein deliberately revealed a saddened look. To him, it didn't matter if Swain knew, because he could check the Deweyville Library. To borrow books from a privately funded library, he had to leave personal information, and his identification must have had sufficient credibility. After all, Klein had relied on an introduction letter from a senior associate professor before he obtained a library card. Even if the gentleman had forged his information, it is very likely that he left some clues which can be helpful to my divination. Klein watched Swain as he returned to the bar counter before entering the billiard room in deep thought. He wasn't in a hurry to head to the Deweyville Library for his investigations. He planned on completing his purchases first. After all, it was unknown if he would encounter danger and be required to use ritualistic magic for subsequent developments. After passing through a few rooms, Klein arrived at the underground market. There were a few stalls and customers, a clear indication that it wasn't peak hour yet. Just as he took a step forward, he suddenly saw the monster, Adamisol, who could smell the scent of death, standing in a corner. The young man was pale, and his eyes gave off a hint of terror and madness. He had also noticed Klein as he looked over. As they made eye contact, Adamisol suddenly extended his hands to cover his face. He moved toward the corner of the wall in a panicked state. Soon, he moved to a side door beside him and staggered as he ran out. "Is that necessary? I just nearly blinded you the last time." "But I didn't do anything." "Seriously, it's as if I'm the devil." Klein's facial expression was somewhat stiff. He shook his head and smiled. He stopped thinking about the monster and came to a stall. He started shopping with a goal in mind. After about half an hour, Klein spent a few pounds, which was most of his secret stash of money. He counted the £3 and 17 soldi he had left, and he felt his heart ache. However, he touched the small metal bottle in the inner pocket of his black windbreaker. This is the floral essence Amantha, which Madame Daly used previously. This is powder mixed with drago tree bark and leaves, essential oil which is extracted from slumber flowers, dried chamomile petals. This is holy night powder which I previously produced myself. Klein recalled the items stored in every tiny pocket of his and repeated them. He did it to prevent himself from failing to find the ingredient that he would need at a crucial moment. Relying on his unique traits in mysticism, he quickly finished memorizing them and walked toward the door. Suddenly, he saw a somewhat familiar figure in the corner of his eyes. It was a young lady in a casual green dress. Her smooth black hair was soft and glistening. She had a round face with long eyes. They gave her a sweet look and a refined bearing. It's the girl who was shivering strangely on the public carriage. She does seem fine. I never expected her to be a mysticism enthusiast. Klein slowed down and thought for a few seconds before finally recalling who she was. He had to admit that, other than Justice, who he had never seen clearly, the young lady was the most beautiful girl he had seen ever since he transmigrated into this world. The sweet and refined girl stood before a stall that sold mysticism books and, in a breach of etiquette, kneeled to rub her fingers against an ancient book. The ancient book was bound with a black hardcover. The book cover had the words, "Book of Witches," in Hermes. It records the black magic of witches. Although I haven't dared to try them, someone I know did. And it really worked. The vendor seized the opportunity to promote the book. The beautiful lady thought and asked, "In your mind, what does a witch look like?" "A witch? A wicked person who brings calamities, disease, and pain," the vendor answered after some thought. Klein didn't hear their conversation because he had already quickly walked out the front entrance. He was rushing to the Deweyville library in a hurry to settle everything before returning home to cook dinner for his brother and sister. Tomato oxtail soup was on the menu. Backland, Crown Turf Club. Audrey Hall wore a long white dress with engagements and ruffled edges, as well as lace around her chest. She stood in a VIP room and watched the horses gallop. She wore a veiled hat, decorated with blue ribbons and silk flowers, and a pair of light-colored fishnet gloves. Her cold and distant gaze seemed out of place in the bustling venue. Just as the racehorse breasted the tape, her friend Viscount Glaint came closer and said with a suppressed voice, "Audrey, every time I see you, you look beautiful from a different angle. How can I help you?" In the past, Audrey might have basked in the young man's compliment, but now she could see Glaint's ulterior motives through his speech and attitude. Due to the early passing of Glaint's father, he had inherited his title of nobility at the age of 20. He was a slightly skinny young man. He looked to the left and right, then chuckled softly as he said, "Audrey, I know a real beyonder, a beyonder that doesn't belong to the royal family. You've disappointed me every time you said that." Audrey looked forward and replied elegantly, "Really? I swear on my father's name. I have seen his beyonder powers," Glaint replied with whisper. Audrey was no longer the same as before, in which should be excited over the news. She was now a beyonder. But to prevent Glaint from turning suspicious, she widened her eyes and faked a surprised smile. She asked, with her voice trembling, "When can I see him?" "Yes, it'd be great to meet other beyonders. I can't just solve every triviality through the Tarot Club. Besides, I must gather my own resources to exchange them with Mr. Fool and Mr. Hanged Man. Not everything can be solved with money." Sigh. "Now that I've sent out the £1,000, I'll have to be more frugal." Glaint was very satisfied with Audrey's response. He looked towards the racecourse and said, "Tomorrow afternoon, there will be a literature and music salon at my place." Inside Deweyville Library, Klein took out his identity card and badge from his pocket and showed them to the few librarians. "I am a probationary inspector from the Special Operations Department of the AWA County Police. I need your cooperation in an investigation," he said in a deep voice, recalling the police films that he used to watch. The librarians looked at the identity card and badge before exchanging looks and nodding at each other. "Go ahead and ask, officer." Klein recited the names of the journals like new archaeology, and upon finishing he said, "I want the borrowing records of the journal for the last 2 months." He realized that one of the librarians had attended to him before, but it was obvious that the man didn't recognize him. "All right. Hold on a second." The librarian started searching and quickly found the recent borrowing records. Klein flipped through the records seriously, looking for the man who had borrowed the same journal as he did. There weren't many names, since there was only one. He had borrowed the journal several times, including the issue that Klein knew of. The earliest entry was at the end of May, and the most recent one was last Saturday, a day before Hermes Vincent's death. Klein ran his finger over the borrower's information and memorized it. Sirius Escapes, cloth merchant, residing at 19 Howes Street. Chapter 103. Doing as the Heart Willed. He resides at 19 Howes Street? Whilst memorizing the information, Klein keenly noticed a piece of information. Yes, Welch stayed on Howes Street. The Divination Club is on Howes Street. This cloth merchant named Sirius Escapes also lives on Howes Street. From the looks of it, it's nothing strange for Welch to know Hermes Vincent either. They might have even gotten to know each through Sirius Escapes. Suddenly, Klein felt that he had linked the clues together as his thoughts turned clear. He was originally confused as to how Welch would be acquainted with Hermes Vincent, since this son of a banker wasn't particularly interested in mysticism. To him, money was more important than divinations. But now, Klein felt that he had an inkling as to how they became acquainted. According to the descriptions of several magazines, middle-class and wealthy residents would gladly pay a visit to their neighbors from the same social class in order to form a social circle which is beneficial to them. Similarly, Welch and the cloth merchant, Sirius, absolutely have the motivation and opportunity to become friends, since they both lived in the Howes Street vicinity. It isn't hard to understand how Sirius knew Hermes Vincent, who regularly went to the Divination Club on Howes Street. Perhaps it was a coincidental meeting, or perhaps Hermes had helped him out before. Regardless, this made it possible for the two of them, who frequently ran into each other within the same area, to become closer to one another. Hermes Vincent wanted to sell his ancient books, and thus Sirius introduced him to Welch, who was an undergraduate of the history department. In Hermes's dream, there was the figure of the suspected evil god, the true creator. He also knew of the proper incantation format. This proves that he was very deep into the realm of mysticism. The possibility that he might have even been a member of some secret organization cannot be dismissed. I cannot rule out the possibility of him joining some secret organization under Sirius's influence. With ideas coming to him so easily, Klein could tell that the information the man had left behind had a certain level of credibility without even using divination methods. Even if he isn't called Sirius Escapes, nor work as a cloth merchant, and doesn't live at 19 Howes Street, he definitely resides at Howes Street, or at the very least, somewhere nearby. While these ideas ran through his mind, Klein viewed the borrowing records once again with this new train of thought. The last time he came to Deweyville Library was last Saturday, a day before Selena's birthday party, which was also a day before Hermes Vincent died. Several days have already passed since then, but he hasn't returned the issues that he borrowed. According to past records, if he only borrowed 2 issues, he would usually return them the next day. Could this mean that he knows of Hermes's death and was scared to the point that he no longer dares to come to the Deweyville Library again? Yes. He started by borrowing several unrelated history books and journals until he narrowed down what he needed, which is very similar to what I had read. This means that there was no one teaching him. There was no senior associate professor from the history department of a university. He did this completely through trial and error. What would a shock target do? 2 choices. 1, if he had all the necessary information, he would head straight to the main peak of the Hornicus mountain range. 2, if he still lacks information, he would lay low and observe the situation. He would only show himself again if he's certain that Hermes's death wouldn't implicate him. Having made this conclusion, Klein closed the borrowing records and returned them to the librarians. He then took out the portrait and asked if anyone had seen the man. Unfortunately, many people came to borrow books every day, and the librarians didn't have any impression of the average person. "All right. Thank you for your time." Klein put away his identification documents and his badge. He had no intention of continuing the investigation alone. This wasn't only dangerous, but also troublesome. He planned to head to Zootland Street once again and hand the case over to Captain and his teammates. He then planned to go home and prepare his tomato oxtail soup for his siblings before heading to the world above the grey fog to divine the target's whereabouts and condition. "Officer, is there anything else?" a librarian asked sincerely as he heaved a sigh of relief. Klein nodded slightly and asked, "No, I will come back if there are new clues." He held his black cane with his left hand and made his way to the door. At this moment, he saw a man enter the library with his head hung low. He was dressed in a double-breasted coat, its collars standing tall. When they walked past each other, Klein caught a glance of his thick, messy brows and his pair of grayish-blue eyes. These were things the tall collar couldn't hide. Sirius? Sirius Escapes? A coincidence? Klein froze. He didn't expect to meet his target here. What kind of luck was this? Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? He evaluated his physical condition and felt his aching, sore muscles. Thus, he acted as though nothing had happened and continued walking towards the door. "Well, we have to follow what our heart tells us. Safety matters. It doesn't matter if I miss this opportunity as long as Sirius is still in Tingen." At this moment, the man in the double-breasted coat arrived before the counter and was handing the journals to one of the librarians. "It's a return," he said with a soft, muffled tone. The librarian received the journals causally, and when he saw it, he suddenly froze. He subconsciously looked up and differently as his body couldn't help but tremble. "Is there a problem?" the man asked in a deep voice. His question seemed like a spark that ignited a fuse, causing the librarian to instantly lose his self-control. He sprinted to the side and shouted, "Officer! The criminal is here!" At this moment, Klein, who hadn't left the building, cursed madly in his heart. He instinctively reached for his holster with his right hand and drew his revolver. That man froze for a moment before turning and breaking into a sprint. But he didn't head for the door. Instead, he escaped in the direction of the oriel window to the side as if he wanted to smash through the glass and jump out onto the street. Klein, who was flustered, turned his head to see the scene when he felt a sudden calm. He realized that even though he was afraid of the target, his target was more afraid of him. The man must be unable to determine my abilities in such an abrupt meeting. He isn't clear on what I'm adept in, and so he will instinctively avoid a direct confrontation and look for other ways to escape. Confident of his analysis, Klein lifted his revolver and pulled the trigger. At that moment, the man in the double-breasted coat abruptly rolled onto the ground in an attempt to avoid the bullet. Following up on that, he pressed down on the ground with his right hand and propelled himself into the air towards the oriel window. Click! Klein's first shot was empty. But this was something he had expected. He took advantage of Sirius's inability to dodge while in mid-air to aim at his torso and pulled the trigger. Bang! The silver demon hunting bullets tore through the air and penetrated straight through Sirius's back. Crash! The glass shattered, and Sirius flew out the window, leaving drops of crimson blood on the crystalline glass fragments and windowsill. Klein was no longer afraid now that the target was injured. He ran over and jumped out the window with the help of a chair. This was the area lining the back of Deweyville Library's ground floor. A row of trees isolated a lush green field. The injured Sirius was running to the side in an attempt to enter a small alley between two buildings. Having not practiced shooting at moving targets, Klein didn't dare to fire blindly. He could only carry his cane in one hand and his gun in the other as he pursued the man in a black coat. Tap, tap, tap. He followed the trail of blood on the floor and tried to close the distance. With a corner coming up, the injured Sirius's speed became slower and slower. Klein, who had been waiting for an opportunity to capture him, suddenly felt a little afraid. He felt as though the man in front of him wasn't human, but a wolf or a tiger, one that harbored terrifying dangers. This was an instinct he had as a seer, and also a warning given to him by his spirituality. Klein immediately slowed down, his eyes scanning the blood on the ground. Compared to the blood he had seen earlier, Sirius's blood was now black. At this moment, a violent wind overwhelmed him. Sirius's face was reflected in Klein's eyes. Thick, messy brows, grayish-blue eyes, multiple protruding warts, an open mouth with 2 rows of white teeth. Sirius was launching a counterattack at this moment. This made the face reflected in Klein's eyes more visible. He could even smell a particularly putrid stench. Sirius pounced a distance of 7 or 8 meters, far more than any normal human being could jump. But as Klein had stopped chasing him just in time, there was still a distance of nearly 10 meters between them. When the distance was shortened to 2 meters, the sticky saliva caused by drool and the disgusting dense warts formed a harrowing scene that made Klein's nerves tense up. Without thinking, he seized the opportunity of the temporary immobility caused by Sirius's pounce to raise his right hand. He fired without stopping, allowing the bullets to rain down on the target's head. Bang! 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 Shooting from such a close distance allowed the silver demon hunting bullets to drill through Sirius's head. Blood splattered everywhere as his face became more and more mangled until he staggered backwards. Klein had emptied the bullets in his revolver in an instant. He subconsciously wanted to take a few steps back in order to confirm the results of this battle. But at this moment, Sirius gave Klein the shock of his life by trying his hardest to stand up straight. Klein abruptly lifted the cane in his left hand. Smack! The sturdy, silver-inlaid black cane struck Sirius's neck, leaving a dark red mark. Smack! 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 Klein acted on instinct, raining blows on his opponent until Sirius collapsed, stumbling onto the ground. Huff! Puff! Huff! Klein supported himself with his cane and took deep breaths. His eyes were trained intently on his target, afraid that Sirius would suddenly jump back to life. At that moment, Sirius's head had basically been smashed into a pulp, and the warts gradually receded. His body stopped moving after a few convulsions. Klein was in no hurry to examine the corpse. Instead, he tossed his cane to the side and took out the demon hunting bullets he had on him and reloaded his revolver. After doing this, he collected himself and fought back his disgust, kneeling down to search the pockets of Sirius's double-breasted coat.